Bonsoir, welcome to the newcomers and welcome back with the others. I know I haven't been updating for a while, but well, I'm in France, we're in lockdown, and it was quite hectic at home. It's hard to have a silence moment. Anyway, here I am, chapter 19 of book 6. The Siege of Macindaw. In addition to the unconscious general, 3 of the Scotty patrol had survived the vicious fight among the trees. 2 were unwounded, although one had a large bruise on his jaw where Horace had hit him. The 3rd was semi-conscious from loss of blood, with a massive axe wound to his arm. Gundar, having recovered from his brief flare of berserker rage, ordered the 2 unwounded Scotty to make a stretcher for the companion and to carry him back to Malcolm's cottage. As they were doing so, he beckoned Will to one side. "One of them got away," he said. "I can't send a few of my men after him if you want." Will hesitated. The Scandians were excellent fighters, but he doubted their ability to track one running man in the dark. He would have preferred if none of MacHadish's parties had escaped, but he knew that was asking too much. In the confusion of the battle, it would have been easy for one man to slip into the trees. It was a pity the man had gotten away, but it was no huge problem. He gestured toward MacHadish, whom Horace had now lowered to the ground with a small sigh of relief. "We've got the one we came for," he said. "Let it go. He can't do us any harm." He frowned thoughtfully, hoping he was right. When the stretcher was ready, Horace heaved the Scotty general onto his shoulder again. Niels Ropehunder offered to relieve him, but Horace shook his head. "Maybe later," Horace replied. "He is all right for the moment." But it was a long way back to the clearing in Grimsdale, and Horace and the Scandians ended up passing the general from one to another, each taking turns carrying him. Eventually, MacHadish regained consciousness and was able to walk, but his hands were tied and rope around his neck was secured to Horace's belt. Horace shrugged several times, turning his neck from side to side to relieve the cramped shoulder muscles. "What are we going to do with this lot?" he asked Will softly, indicating the prisoners. Will didn't answer immediately. "I suppose we'll have to build some kind of stockable," he said uncertainly. "We'll certainly have to keep guard over them." Horace grunted. "The boys will love that," he said, indicated the Scandians marching ahead of them, joking and laughing quietly among themselves. "They won't want to spend their time guarding prisoners. They like their food and drink too much." Will shrugged. "That's too bad," he said. "Maybe we can rig some kind of shackles for them, leg irons or something like that. Then we'd only need one man at a time to keep an eye on them." "That shouldn't be too much of a hardship," Horace agreed. It was late night before they reached the clearing. The moon had risen and set, unseen by them as they moved beneath the thick blanket of trees. The glowing remains of the Scandians' cooking fire cast a flickering light over the clearing as they emerged from the trees. There were lights in the windows of Malcolm's cottage as well. The front door opened as they walked into the clearing, spilling an elongated rectangle of light across the dark ground. Malcolm stepped out to greet him. "I heard you were on your way," he said. Will and Horace exchanged tired grins. "We should have known nothing will get past your network of watchers," Will said. Malcolm pulled a wry face. "Force of habit," he said as he spoke. He had moved beside the litter and was examining the wounded Scotty. "You'd better get him to my house, where I can take a look at him," he said. Gundar regarded the one man with disinterest. "Why bother with an enemy?" he said. Malcolm's eye rose to meet his. There was a hard light in them. "That makes no difference to me. He is injured," he said. Gundar met his gaze for a few seconds, then shrugged. "Suit yourself," he said. "But if you ask me, it's a waste of time." As they moved farther into the light spilling from the house, Malcolm noticed the rough bandage that several of the Scandians wore and understood the reason for Gundar's seeming callousness. The Scandian captain felt a strong sense of responsibility for his men. "I'll look at your men too," he said, with a note of apology in his voice. Gundar nodded in acceptance. "I'd appreciate that." During this exchange, MacHaddish had been peering around, taking in the scene. His eyes were bright and intelligent, and his face was fixed in a heavy frown under the blue paint. Malcolm studied him with interest. "I take it this is MacHaddish," he said. The general looked sharply at him as he recognized his name. Will nodded. "That's him," he said. "And a right dancy lettuce, I can tell you." For a second, he remembered the moment in the clearing when MacHaddish's knife was bearing down on him, closer and closer to his throat. He shuddered at that memory. Said Malcolm, taking in the keen, calculating light in the general's eyes. "I trust him but as far as I can throw him." He inspected the rough bandage Horace had bound around the Scotty's wounded hand. "That do for now," he said. "I take a closer look later." He turned away and called across the clearing, "Trobor, bring the chains." The massive figure appeared at the opposite side of the clearing and lumbered towards them. One of the Scotty prisoners took a step backward, muttering something in surprise at the sight of the huge figure. Trobor was carrying several lengths of iron chain. As he came closer, Will saw that the chains had thick, hard leather collars attached. "I thought we might need something to keep our hot stage out of mischief," Malcolm explained. "So I set Trobor to making this up earlier this afternoon." Will and Horace exchanged a quick glance. "I'm glad someone thought about it," Will said. Malcolm smiled. "You coach them, I keep them," he said. "Shackle them, please, Trobor," he added. The Scotty warriors recoiled from the giant figure at first. Then, as one of the Scandians growled a warning, they submitted to having the heavy leather collars attached around their necks. Assisted by two of the Scandians, Trobor then led the prisoners across to a huge fallen log under the hedge of a tree. He hammered large iron staples through the end links of each chain to fasten them to the log. The snow stopped, so they can sleep in the open, Malcolm said. They're used to it. He glanced at McCadish. I think it might be better if we keep the general separate from the others. Horace nodded. Good thinking. He can't have his own log. It's a privilege, Frank, he added with a small grin. When McCadish had been secured in a similar fashion, several other members of Malcolm's secret community emerged from the trees. As was their custom, bringing food and drink to the tired ambush party. Malcolm, sensing Gundor's priorities, tended to the 2 injured Scandians, cleaning their wounds thoroughly, dressing them with a healing salve and bandaging them neatly and efficiently. Then he addressed the wounded and still unconscious Scotty, cleaning the axe wound in his arm and gently sewing the edges together with clean threads. Horace winced at the sight of the needle passing in and out of the man's flesh. When Malcolm had finished, Trollborg carried the Scotty to a bunk bed under the shelter of the veranda. He laid him in it and covered him with blankets. Then, unconscious or not, he fastened another collar around the man's throat and attached it by a short length of chain to the bed. If he goes anywhere, I'll have to take his bed with him, Malcolm observed, a glint in his eye. Adapt his help to the effort. The other Scottish soldiers, having been fed by Malcolm's people, had already wrapped themselves in their massive tartans and leaned back against the logs they were fastened to. By now they were philosophical about their fate as captives, and reasonably reassured that they weren't going to be killed or tortured. As a result, they reacted like soldiers everywhere. They took the chance to catch up on some sleep. Their snores were audible across the clearing. By contrast, McCadish sat straight-backed by a second log, his eyes darting around the clearing. He'll need watching, Horace said, chewing on a chunk of tender grilled lamb wrapped in a soft piece of flat bread. Close by, Trollborg grunted something unintelligible and moved out to sit on the ground a few meters from McCadish. His eyes fixed on him. Silently, a black and white shape detached itself from the shadows and slipped across the clearing to the side. Will smiled at the sight of her. The dog can take care of that, he said, but perhaps we'd better set a watch through the night. At least, out in the open, the way they are, they're easy to keep an eye on. Malcolm joined them, working his shoulder up and down, easing the arm and back muscles that were cramped and stiff from bending over, tending to the wounded man. Trollborg can watch him for a couple of hours, he said. You two should rest. I'll organize a guard rooster. Will smiled gratefully. I won't argue, he said. It has been a long day. He turned away, heading towards his and Horace's tents. Then a thought struck him, and he stopped and looked back at the healer. When do you want to question him? He said, jerking a thumb at the stiffen-backed figure chained to the log. Malcolm answered without hesitation. Tomorrow night, he said, the little surprise I've planned to play on his nerves will be much more effective in the dark. Okay, folks, that's it for chapter 19. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope it was understandable as always. I know I stuttered on some words. Please don't hesitate and correct me when I make mistakes. I'm doing an English degree, so that would actually be kind of helpful. Anyway, bye. See you later.